it's an enormous pleasure to be back here at the View conference, and I've looked through the program. You will not find a better set of more innovative works to hear about than you will find here at the View conference, which is amazing. As Barbara mentioned, I actually have a new affiliation since the last time I spoke here, which is working with Google in their virtual reality department, which is exciting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about some stuff we've continued to do with the light stages as well for this presentation for photoreal digital actors. Google Daydream is actually many different possible projects. One of the things that happens to be the Daydream View headset, where you can drop your Android phone in here. There's a number of them that are supported and be transported into virtual reality, which is an exciting thing. And the stuff that you see first off is a nice menu of different options that you can do. And apparently one of the things that people super like to do and spend a lot of time in is virtual reality video. So clicking on the YouTube icon that's over there, you'll actually be able to go and watch a whole bunch of interesting things. The question is, how do you shoot the virtual reality video? Well, one way to do that is using a 360 VR camera. There's a relatively new one that's been produced with Google Daydream in collaboration with this company in China called Yi that does action sports cameras. And essentially, we've worked to design a system that has 16 of these Yi cameras in a circle. And actually a hidden 17th camera that's one of the reasons the thing is a little bit higher up, and you can also use it as a salad bowl, is that down in the middle here there's actually another little camera that looks up, and so its rays kind of are coincident with the rays going around there. And then using this technology here that Steve Seitz' team has put together up in Seattle, it actually assembles a panorama out of the left half of all of the images, and then another panorama out of the right half of all of the images, puts this together as seamlessly as possible, and then literally inside of YouTube, that's what is playing back to your headset, and then the phone, the YouTube VR application is then making it so that you can pan your head around, look in any direction, and get a good stereo view no matter which direction you look in. And here's a little view of that cute up camera that's there. Another thing that was a recent announcement that I think is pretty cool is obviously this is a relatively, not like a consumer cost camera, but if you want to shoot virtual reality yourself, there's going to be some products coming out called VR 180, which is essentially something that's as small as smaller than a cell phone, and it just has two fisheye lens cameras that each get 180 degrees field of view, and they're the same distance apart as your eyes. So an incredibly simple idea. One of them will be coming from Lenovo, and there's 3 or 4 other manufacturers that will do that. And the cool thing about this video is if you upload it to YouTube, everyone can watch it whether they have a VR headset or not. If you're not in a VR headset, then it just takes the left eye, crops it into a rectangle, and distorts it, and you can watch the video like normally. This was one of the more popular VR 180 videos of a father and son team that do various things sort of about technology. In this case, they were chainsawing through a massive ball of rubber bands, and so sort of about technology. And then what's actually inside the viewer are these 2 views. So you can look around. The stereo works pretty well when you're looking forward to the sides, and you feel immersed in the experience.
Are you seeing this?
And so whether you're in actual headset or you're not in a headset, you can still get your videos out there. And the things will be something that costs less than a cell phone. One of the things that's a little bit of a bummer, if you're interested in like faces, like I am, when you're in VR, is that they actually cover up quite a bit of your face. And another project that I think is really cool at Google, that's been a collaboration between Daydream and Google Research, is a technology for headset removal, or at least visually removing a headset. This is something that they've prototyped on an HTC Vive device, which is one of these tethered PC ones that has external trackers. But you can take a look here that by getting a scan of your face first, they can, at least through some real-time visual effects trickery, to an outside observer make it look like you can still see the face.
Everyone can see what virtual reality feels like.
But Tom, something is still missing. We want to see her face.
Oh, well, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that.
Let me show you something.
How did you do that?
So we do this by first making a digital scan of your face. Can you move your head side to side and up down? And follow the flower on the screen with your eyes. So now we are going to process the data that we just captured to build a dynamic 3D model of your face with your eyes moving in different directions. And like we can do blinks.
All right, so these are my butterflies.
Tilt brush.
I did a metamorphosis piece so you can kind of see how a caterpillar turns into a butterfly.
Would it be cool if I did this and then went underneath? And, I was dancing with him, you know. What do you guys know about this right here? What do you think I do at my house all day?
Yeah, this is fun. This is fun. Watch out.
Avnish, what do you call this technology?
We call this headset removal.
Oh, I get it. Like headset removal.
So that's kind of fun. Obviously taking advantage of the tracking technology and you just render the face. Also really interesting, from a facial animation perspective. It only has to replace this part and it's not really doing any of the emotions of the face, just the view direction. You have to have an eye tracker inside the headset for this to work. But it works surprisingly well already, and some future work will try to push it a bit further forward. Last thing that I've got from Google is something that was announced relatively recently, which is an effort to take augmented reality technology and make it work essentially on any Android smartphone. This is something that's called AR Core, and I'll turn the sound down a little bit here. Of the things I've done at Google, I've advised a little bit about the lighting algorithms. And what I think is fun about this kind of augmented reality problem of adding synthetic objects into the scene is that essentially you're making your cell phone do the visual effects pipeline in real time right in front of you running on your cell phone. It has to do the match moving, as we call it in visual effects, but camera tracking, so that the digital objects actually sit on the ground and move appropriately when you move the camera around. But then you also have to light them somehow. And given that this is rendered in real time, you can't send out a visual effects technician to go out and shoot an HDRI map to light the character properly. So you kind of have to guess at what the lighting is on the scene based on what you see in the background. And that's a very limited field of view and it's limited dynamic range. But there's a couple of things that you can do to try to get that to be relatively correct and or relatively plausible anyhow. So I've advised a little bit on the algorithms that are coming into that. As far as lighting goes, I've been very happy to keep my affiliation with the University of Southern California so I can go over and visit the light stages and continue to advise a couple of graduate students. And the last time that I was here at the View Conference, I actually talked a bit about one of our earlier light stage systems, Light Stage 3. This is something that we did in 2002, and the idea was that if you want to composite an actor into some shot of your film when they weren't really there, that it would be probably a good thing if you can light them the right way so they really drop into the scene properly. So if you surround them with color LEDs, drive those according to the high dynamic range panorama that you've shot in the scene, then you can light them literally with the light that was there, so when you composite them in, it looks relatively realistic. And at the time of the SIGGRAPH submission, of course, as soon as the paper's sent out, you want to start sharing your work with some of your colleagues. So one of our distinguished visitors that we had back in 2002, I think it was even days after the paper was published, was Professor Don Greenberg from Cornell University. He will be speaking in one of the keynotes on Friday, I believe. And we're lighting him here with some light from Firenze, the Galleria degli Uffizi. And then this is actually lighting him with his own Cornell box, his radiosity simulation there with the red and the green from the other sides. And one thing I did not realize that the light stage has as a feature is that it keeps people from aging. You can look at Don right here in the audience, and I basically don't see any difference at this point. So thank you again for helping us do that. When I was here 4 years ago, I talked a little bit about how we'd done a little bit of work with the folks making the movie Gravity, which implemented this lighting reproduction technique with LED panels to light the actors with projections of the environments that they'd be put into, so that Sandra Bullock and George Clooney's faces would be lit by the light of the Earth or the space station or the space telescope, even though they were being composited into what was otherwise a completely computer-generated scene. And we've seen this technique actually get used on a few other films since then. One of the biggest applications I thought was really neat was some work for Star Wars Rogue One, where the amazing visual effects folks at Industrial Light and Magic illuminated these cockpits of X-Wing fighters and such with an enormous screen of LEDs to get the lighting on there. They also did a little bit of light stage work capturing the stand-in actors for the Governor Tarkin and Princess Leia characters as well. And to see the next huge application of this, we might actually look to China. There's a film coming out next year that is going to be pushing this LED lighting reproduction technology into things that take up entire 30-meter sound stages as well. The LEDs are made in China anyway, so that's probably a good place to do that. As people have been doing this more and more, we were getting increasingly worried about a little bit of a problem that happens when you're lighting people with red and green and blue LEDs, which is that there are pretty significant gaps in the visible spectrum in terms of what the illumination actually does. As we know, things like daylight has a nice broad spectrum across the entire rainbow. Incandescent light has more red than it has blue, but otherwise it's pretty flat curve. When we take an RGB color and reproduce it with a red LED and a green LED and a blue LED, we can produce just about any color that we can see, but we can't produce the spectrum of any illuminant that we might be used to seeing people lit by. And as a result, since lighting hitting surfaces happens in the full spectrum domain, you might not get the right answer. In fact, if you're naive about it, just driving your LEDs with the red, green, and blue of your light probe images, you might be very far off. So all of the projects that have done this so far actually have to do quite a bit of color correction in order to try to get the results to look accurate. And of course, we would prefer not to have artists working on problems that can be solved with technology. We want artists to be working on things that are creative and artistic and are helping tell the stories. And it seemed like there should be a technological answer to this. So one thing that we thought is, well, we should probably add some more LEDs to the light stage, and they make more than just red, green, and blue. And so when we made our latest light stage, we added 3 more colors, cyan, which is between blue and green. We added amber, which is between green and red, and we added a white LED as well. We were going to have white LEDs on it anyway when we use it for the facial scanning. So we actually built this without really knowing yet how we were going to drive these LEDs, because the way that we go out and capture lighting is usually by taking pictures of mirrored spheres, and so we get a red, green, blue regular image of what the light is. So how can we get a spectral lighting measurement and then drive our 6 LEDs so we get a better representation of the spectrum? The answer that we got, fortunately, was not to get a $15,000 spectroradiometer and aim it one at a time in every little direction and take like a 30-second measurement to get the full spectrum of the light coming from everywhere. That would be too slow. And what we eventually found is that you can do it quite quickly if you build your lighting capture device, your light probe, in a way that it has some of these color charts in it. And these are little color charts. They're miniature ones you can buy from a company called Edmund Optics. They're a little expensive, but they have all of the same colors of paint, actually the same spectra of paint made by Gretag Macbeth, now owned by X-Rite, in the standard color checker charts. And we made an arrangement where there's 5 of them. One kind of points up, left, right, down, and one points forward. And what happens is that since each one of these little color chips has a particular graph of spectral reflectance, you actually, in seeing light hit that color chart, it basically tells you the spectrum of the illumination. It certainly tells you how that spectrum of the illumination lights the color chart, and usually the way that we check to see if the spectrum of the light was right is we look to see, does a color chart look the same when it's lit by our synthesis of the light compared to what it really looked like out there. And if it works for all 24 of those squares, then it'll work for most normal materials, and it'll certainly work for human skin. There's actually 2 patches on there that are designed to have the same spectral reflectance characteristic of skin, and they're not bad for that. So what we did, and I'll skip over the math of the paper, we found a way that if you have a red, green, blue image of the color and intensity of light from every direction here, and if you want to do it in fewer shots, you can put another sphere here that's like darker, and then you get some of the high dynamic range for free. We can promote that to basically a spectral measurement based on this low resolution sampling of what the spectrum of the light is in different directions. And in fact, you don't even have to really do any mathematics for it. You just have to see how does the light stage light the color charts when they're lit by each of the LEDs, and then you figure out which combination of LED lights reproduce those color charts that you see there. So the result is that for a given camera, we can now drive the light stage to reproduce not just the RGB colors of the light, but actually the color rendition effects. And we wanted to test this with a bit of validation. So we got a couple of friends to come in. Don wasn't available, so we asked our friend Jessica to drop by. And this is actually her just standing outside of our institute. It's in the late afternoon. The sun's on her face. And after we took that picture of her, we asked her to step out of the frame. We took a background image. And then we quickly got in there with our light probe system. It's actually mounted on a bar connected to the camera, so you can just kind of go in, click, come out, you got it. And then we brought her into the light stage. Took us a little while to process it. And then in the light stage, we lit her with the reproduction of that light. We filmed her. You don't see the light stage back here because we actually had like a piece of kind of black cardboard behind her. So that we didn't have the lights. But then what we did is we very quickly took 2 photos. The second photo, we had some high-powered flashes from our cameras, and we hit just that black cardboard with the flash. So we light up the background, and that gives us our alpha channel. This is way better than doing green screen because it doesn't create the green spill. So we get a good matte, perfectly good for a still subject. And then now we can composite Jessica onto the background. So there's the real photo, there's in the light stage, there's the composite, and then hopefully it looks pretty similar to when she was actually inside. And then the whole point of this is we didn't do any color correction. This is just what happens from the photos from the camera. And any cinematography that you want to do after that, go ahead, but we want to be able to just start with the right answer. We did another example here. This is our friend Jonetta. She's, again, outside our institute, but she's in the shade. There's a real photo. There she is in the light stage. And we do the composite. And it matches pretty well. You can even see over here kind of like the reflection of the sky in her forehead, and that's the reflection of the building on the tip of her nose there, and that's all reproduced in the composite. And just to push it a little bit further forward, we were borrowing my friend Greg's Canon 5D Mark III camera because we could run Magic Lantern on it and get raw video. And this is late at night. It's like a SIGGRAPH submission deadline. We wanted to do like an animated example. So as it turns out, one of the virtual reality projects at our institute had built a small set of a saloon that you could go into and talk to some virtual bartenders and outlaws and stuff. And so we used their set. This is all very late at night. And it turns out we decided my friend Greg was the one who looked most like a cowboy. So he got to wear the hat. And we intentionally lit the set with as many mixed lighting sources as we could. We lit it with incandescent sources. We lit it with, we rented a fluorescent Kino flow light. And then there was some practical incandescents there. And then, of course, we had lots of LED lights we could put out. So we then put him on this dolly track. So it kind of looks like he's riding a very smooth and short horse going through. But then we drove the light probe through here, programmed the light stage to play that back, and then this is him. For this, we had to do green screen because we had to get it all in one shot. So there was a little bit of, tricky rotoing on the beard and such, and we didn't do a completely professional job of that. But this is the reproduced light and the overall color tone and temperature and all that with no color correction kind of showed that we could reproduce a lighting environment reasonably well just going through there. And thanks very much to Greg for helping us out with that. We've continued to try to look at other research as well in the area of digitizing faces. And one of those things has been trying to get even higher resolution data when we do the 3D scanning of faces. Normally, in the light stage scan where we go through our polarized gradient illumination patterns, we can get down to about 1/10 of a millimeter accuracy, which is enough to see like skin pores and fine creases. But we got interested in trying to go beyond that, maybe another order of magnitude. And for that, just simply based on the number of pixels that a camera has, you're going to have to move the camera closer and capture just part of the face. So we thought, let's try to get like skin texture. Skin actually has very interesting microstructure further below the levels that we have can capture in the light stage. And as we know from a lot of the great work that folks have done at Cornell University, for example, the microstructure, the microfacets of surfaces have a large impact on the way that they reflect light and the character of their luster and their specular reflections. So we actually first built a small little light stage here out of 12 extra lights we had, and we put a macro lens, and we'd have people put their face up to a little, kind of like little 1 centimeter aperture there, and we could do our polarized gradient lighting captures there. And then we eventually realized that you can actually just do it in the light stage itself if you put the camera in the light stage. It doesn't block enough too many of the lights, and we run the light stage a little bit brighter for this because people have their eyes closed. And we started capturing some skin samples. This is our graduate student, Paul Graham, who worked on the project. And you can see that we're looking at a couple of different patches of his face. That's his nose. You see even things that maybe you didn't want to when you get that close to skin. But these are parts of what it makes us look human and real. And when we go through those patterns, we can turn it into a high-resolution displacement map or normal map. And one thing that we found that was interesting is that you actually have very different texture on your skin depending on whether you're on the forehead or the nose or the temple or the chin or the cheek. And if you go to a different individual, they will have different skin textures, but there will probably be more in common between my forehead and your forehead than between my forehead and my nose, for example. So we started to do a little bit of a database of these, and then using some texture synthesis algorithms, even though we only get like a little patch of skin here, here, and here, we came up with a way to kind of synthesize that detail per region onto the entire face. And that allowed us to start making our facial scans a little bit higher resolution than what we were getting before. And that actually can affect the kind of the luster of the skin that you'll see and getting more of that BRDF. So people actually sometimes ask us when we're scanning an actor if we can get some microgeometry samples as well. Another thing that we found a little after that, or actually that I noticed one day kind of raising my eyebrows looking at myself in the rearview mirror in traffic in Los Angeles, you got to find things to do. I had like kind of bright sunlight right on my forehead. I realized when I raised my eyebrows, the specular reflections on my head change completely. And in fact, they not only go from looking kind of smooth to looking kind of shiny, but actually they become anisotropic. That means that the spread of the specular highlight on my skin, when I raised my eyebrows, it would actually get elongated vertically and stay sharp horizontally. And what's happening is that microstructure in your skin is actually bunching up and changing the shape of the surface at a microstructure level. This is about 10 microns or 1/100 of a millimeter. And when you stretch it, it flattens it out. And actually, one of the reasons that we have skin microstructure is to act as a reserve of tissue so that when we move our faces, we have something to take up the slack and it can actually be pliable. If you look at a part of our face that doesn't move very much, that doesn't animate, the tip of our nose, for example, that is going to be very shiny. If you look at you know, high up on a hairline where you don't have muscles under it, you'll have very shiny areas here because it's very smooth. It doesn't need the reserve of tissue because it doesn't need to stretch. So we thought, well, let's try to study that phenomenon. Let's try to figure out if we can do some simulation of that in computer graphics. And because we like to, and because we're inspired by folks like Don at Cornell, we like to do some measurement for these things. We like our measurement devices to look very friendly and like they can't hurt you, but we don't always do that very effectively. This kind of scary device here, fortunately we have graduate students who are up for doing these captures, is designed to gently stretch and compress skin as we do the scans of it. We found, actually, we just ended up using double stick tape to attach you to these kind of little 3D printed plastic things. We found out people in the medical community who do related kinds of research also use double stick tape, so we felt good about that. What happens is that we can then get a scan under different stretches, and we did different orientations as well. And skin does amazing things when it stretches and compresses. Look at how, I mean, this is the data. Look at when it's stretched, it forms all these little ridges that are vertical, and that's going to be something that will create broad specular lobes. These are essentially like what the highlight would look like based on that geometry. And this isn't because we're saying that's what it should look like. This is actually the surface orientation distribution of this scan. And you can see that the surface normals just change from being one direction to the other direction as you stretch and compress it. And we found that this holds when we rotate the thing to different angles as well. So we ended up having to come up with a way to then think of simulating this. And doing a dynamic simulation at this level of detail, even using the amazing simulation techniques that exist in industry, like for example at Weta Digital, they do amazing skin tissue simulations for their digital characters. I actually had a chance to talk to some of the folks and figure out how long it would take to simulate skin at 100th of a millimeter resolution over the entire face. It would be too long to get your shots done. So Koki Nagano, our graduate student, came up with a way to approximate this. You just take the neutral displacement map that you've up-resed from the static capture, and then when it stretches, you actually just blur the displacement map in the direction of the stretch. So it takes out the bumpiness to make it look like the skin's gotten smooth in that direction. And when you compress it, you sharpen, just with image processing filters, the displacement map in that direction. And that you can actually do at interactive rates on a graphics card. So these are some real-time renderings of skin microstructure simulation. So this is without the extra microstructure. If we were to add just kind of regular non-stretched microstructure on top, I mean, it adds some visual interest, but it's not going with the grain of the stretch. And now if we add the dynamic microstructure, you can see it goes along with the grain, and it actually starts looking kind of like skin does when you do these kind of animations. So we got our digital Emily project scans up, and we did an animation of Emily, and we had a good smile from her where she stretches her cheek, and then we get a little bit of a skin microstructure here. And for some audiences, this is where I would try to explain why getting obsessive about incredibly minor effects like this is important and why we're not just wasting our time. But fortunately, I'm here at View, and everybody here totally gets that, so thank you for that. The one thing that was, that looking at this, we realized we weren't getting, in kind of comparing photos to actual Emily, is we weren't getting her vellus hair, that kind of peach fuzz that we have all around us. Of these kind of almost transparent little hairs, and that was actually affecting the results from looking as real as they should, or as much like ground truth as they should. And so we've started to look a little bit at a technique for capturing vellus hair on faces. This ended up being challenging because these little vellus hairs are incredibly narrow, and they're basically transparent cylinders, long transparent cylinders, which sometimes catch the light according to, conical reflections, and a lot of times don't. And they just prove to be something that was important for how faces reflect light, even seen at a macro scale, but like really hard to actually measure them. The one reliable lighting condition that we could figure out that makes the vellus hair light up in a way that you can separate it from the skin is to backlight the face. And so this here is a real photograph of our grad student, Chloe. There's a spotlight behind her, and we're taking a picture, and it makes all of these hairs glow in a nice way. So you might think, or actually we thought, well, maybe we'll just like take pictures of her at different angles, and we'll just read out all of those hairs, and then we'll put them into our model. And we kind of sort of did that, but actually it gets more complicated than that, because when you're looking along that edge, it looks like you're seeing like only a little thin bit of hair, and that's true in this dimension, but you're actually staring through quite a lot of hair going forward and back, like maybe a centimeter's worth of little hair tips are in that area. And so if you look closely, they're all piled up on top of each other here. So we sadly couldn't come up with a way to actually literally digitize every little one of those hairs and then put your exact vellus hairs onto the computer-generated character. But what we did do is come up with a procedural model that procedurally generates populations of hair that have a certain standard deviation of curvature and length and orientation. And we just grew hair orientations so that they would match up to the photograph. And we could populate a digital scan of her, like this one here, with hair that kind of matches up. And so looking a little closer, this is a real photograph here. And this is as far as we've gotten in terms of how good we can do of making this hair where we kind of statistically match the quality of the hair to what the photograph is to render that. And we can spin around a little bit. So this was a talk at SIGGRAPH this year. This is rendered in Arnold with all the little hair strands, and you can see some of those. So we hope to keep working on that. We've been very happy to have a few continued collaborations with the amazing folks in the visual effects industry in applying some of the light stage scanning to some digital characters that we'll see. And it's actually really awesome that the View conference here is going to have talks by a number of these folks. So if you manage to make it to Martin Culpit's image engine talk tomorrow at 14:30, talking about Logan, you'll get to see how, among other many great visual effects in the film, some scans of Hugh Jackman, actually a very extensive documentation of him in 2 forms of makeup, different expressions, all the different lighting conditions, different maps. This is actually what our maps look like when we deliver them. They look kind of terrible, but you know, they're got diffuse, specular, surface normals. We actually try to estimate ambient occlusions so you can divide it out of the flat lit images too if you're computing your own. And when you give it to a great visual effects company like Image Engine, they can then make their digidouble, which you see on the right, match quite well to the real actor on the left. And this is just one lighting condition. Another thing that we tend to continue to shoot for everybody is the one light at a time data, which gives you a reference of what the real face looked like lit from every direction. So as you're tuning in your subsurface scattering shaders and your specular lobes, when it finally matches every single lighting direction, you can feel like, okay, this probably is working at this point. If you're able to stay until Thursday, amazing visual effects folks Martin Hill and Scott Stockdyke will be talking about the work in Valerian that scanned a bunch of wonderful, beautiful tall people to turn into somewhat bluer, beautiful tall people. And also like a pretty amazing dance sequence shot as well. To date, I think the high water mark in digital human characters that I've seen as a combination of quality and then just sheer number of shots that's happened was the work done by Furious 7. And that's one of a couple projects that I think were really interesting uses of facial scanning in digital humans, because they basically work to combine two people that you can scan into one person that you couldn't scan. And in the case of Furious 7, there was the tragedy of the actor Paul Walker being killed in an accident halfway through production. And at some point, it instantly seemed like there's just no way to finish this film. But after some time went by, the family, which included his two younger brothers, Caleb Walker and Cody Walker, actually were supportive and willing to collaborate on being able to finish the film. And as it turns out, Caleb Walker is just a few years younger and has a pretty solid resemblance to Paul Walker in the upper part of his face, but then his chin kind of gets a lot narrower. And Cody Walker, who's considerably younger, actually has more of the shape of the chin. So if you see him kind of from behind, at an angle, you'll actually get more of a resemblance to Paul there. So we did a lot of scans for Weta Digital, both with and without the stubble. Both of these guys trained with acting coaches, trained with physical coaches that got into shape for it. And with an amazing amount of artistry, the scans are just the very, very beginning of the process. Weta was able to craft a digital Paul Walker face that ends up showing up in, Martin can correct me, but I think it's around 300 shots of the film. And half of the shots are digital, half of them are real. One of the things that I saw at Cornell is that they would do renderings of the Cornell box to try to show off that radiosity algorithms are doing the right thing, but they weren't satisfied until they put a photo of the Cornell box side by side and they looked the same. Weta actually managed to basically do that, having a digital character that can intercut across an entire film. Some of the shots in here are digital, some are real. I won't let this run too long, but another thing that was that happened is that actually there was very little publicity about this work as a Vin Diesel is real, by the way, but the production very understandably did not want this creation of Paul Walker to take attention away from the very real human story that this is his last film and the last way for his fans to appreciate him. But unfortunately, as a result, I think the visual effects work in that film didn't get the publication within the community that was really deserving of. Weta, however, continued to do great digital characters, and in another example of turning two people that you can scan into one person that you can't was for a comedy film called Central Intelligence. And in this movie, Dwayne Johnson has a flashback sequence where he's back in high school, he's nerdy, he's terribly overweight, and there's a couple of shots of him basically being sadly bullied and giving the backstory of maybe why he determined that he just needs to be that much of a badass in the future. And so to do this, we were asked to do a couple of scans for two people. One of them was Dwayne Johnson, who we'd seen before, and the other was Vine dancing star Sione Maraschino. And the idea was to kind of create a mashup of these two people in order to do the young Bob Stone character. When we heard that these two big guys were coming, we got a little concerned about whether the seat on our light stage was going to be, so we actually replaced the mechanism there to put the stage up and down for that. Again, I won't show any clips of this here, but the character that they got was so darn good. He sings in the shower. These are complicated expressions, complicated performances, and somehow, even though this character is half of Dwayne Johnson's age, obviously very different body type, they had to make him look like Dwayne Johnson too and get a Dwayne Johnson-like performance out of him. And you can't imagine very many places in the world this could happen other than at Weta. It's brilliant work. Again, probably ignored a little bit because it was not a huge visual effects spectacular movie. This is a sequence at the beginning for a comedy. But it's really nice to see that visual effects and high-end digital character work can play a supporting role in a wider range of films these days. I'm actually really excited about the talk that's right after me. We're going to hear the super impressive visual effects supervisor, John Nelson, talk about one of the most anticipated films that we've had, which is Blade Runner. The week before my team went over to Google, we were actually working pretty hard on doing a couple of scans for this, which I'll just show quickly. But basically, in order to create one of the characters, they had to create somebody who was in the original film. They did this by kind of taking two people that you can scan and creating one person that you can't scan out of this. This is Lauren Pita, who played kind of the body actress for this in the makeup. And you can see we're actually, this is Chloe Legendre doing the microgeometry capture of her. And then, let's see here. I will very, very quickly say, I don't want to steal any of John's thunder, so let's go forward. We also scanned another two actresses, and I thought this was interesting, so that they could be merged, two people that you can scan, into one person that can't exist in a completely different way that's actually part of the story as well. So again, I'll leave it to John to talk about those things. We like to do scans for as many kinds of projects as possible, including projects that have nothing necessarily to do with visual effects and that are like a little bit more academic. And one of the things that our group decided to participate in is something called the WikiHuman project, or the Digital Human League. And this was started by Chaos Group Labs, and what they did is they invited a bunch of people in industry and academia who are working on digital human technology in one form or another to try to collaborate in discussions and then eventually create a shared database of different data sets that people can use to do digital human research. And one of the people very supportive of this is Mike Seymour, who writes for fxguide.com, who decided to pursue a PhD in the area of digital humans and the uncanny valley. And so he donated himself to science. A whole bunch of light stage scans were done with him, lots of expressions, lots of lighting conditions, as high resolution as we could. He also went to Disney Research to get very high resolution scans of his eyes. And at SIGGRAPH, this work actually culminated in a project called Meet Mike. So in Los Angeles this summer, if you went into the main area with emerging technologies and the show floor, off to the left, there were people getting interviewed by a digital human in virtual reality. And that digital human was actually based on Mike Seymour, and he was actually puppeteering it live. The renderings ended up being pretty good, particularly if you consider that this is rendering in real time, 90 frames per second stereo on a VR headset, and that it's also being animated with no human intervention, just from a capture rig. That stuff was done by 3Lateral and a couple other companies put together by Epic Games. And so you can kind of see this is the level of the character is. I think the shadows in between the teeth are a little extreme, but it certainly has some nice facial textures, has some nice eyes. And they did actually pull off running this thing all week at SIGGRAPH in real time in these booths that you'd see here. So this is Mike Seymour over on the left here. I think maybe Dynamic XYZ was one of the other animation companies. And this is actually me in a VR headset over here. They gave me kind of a more cartoony avatar because they didn't have time to put me through the whole process. And he would interview people about digital humans and virtual reality all throughout the week. So I have some footage of him interviewing an avatar of one of our friends, Ken Perlin, and you can see how that kind of came out. So that's the Ken Perlin avatar. Ken is in VR and like, I can see, just like I saw, kind of this enormous, like 60 centimeter tall Mike Seymour head in front of you. They intentionally made him larger than life because the resolution of virtual reality is limited at this point. So they wanted to be able to appreciate all the textures. Maybe that looks a little bit like Ken Perlin, but Mike Seymour definitely looks like Mike Seymour. And they had to run into all of the problems you'd get with like getting eye lines to work, figuring out how you can do hand gestures and such. But they actually got the thing running all week. And I would say that getting a photoreal-ish face running in virtual reality ended up happening at least a year or two before I thought that was going to occur. So that was one project where it wasn't like feature film, but we got to do some light stage scans, and it was kind of exciting. Another one that we did came at the invitation of the Smithsonian Institution. I had given a talk at one of their 3D digitization fairs, at the end of 2013, talking about work we'd done to scan objects, to scan environments. I showed a little clip of the Campanile movie, and then showed some work that we'd been doing to scan faces. And apparently that kind of set in with the people at the Smithsonian Museum over in Washington, D.C., because they thought to call me a little bit after that. And they asked a question, which is, hey, we have someone who's a bit of a VIP. We're wondering if you could scan them, but we'd have to do it over here on the East Coast. So does your light stage travel? And I thought, okay, it's probably going to be interesting. So I said, well, sure, of course, we could get a light stage over there. So some weeks went by, and then they told us what we were really doing and that they really needed to see some results from this mobile light stage. So we ended up having a very active Memorial Day weekend trying to build a gantry where we realized there's just no way to bring the entire sphere of illumination. This thing needs to ship in an airplane crate. It needs to potentially go through a single door and then get set up potentially in a relatively short period of time. So what we did is we built this mobile gantry with wheels, and then we just started stripping equipment off of our light stage. We got 50 of our light sources off with the polarizers. We pulled off all of our cameras. We put little monitors on so we could actually line the subject up without having to look through the cameras. And we built the mobile version of it. And then we shipped that off to DC. And we had to go through some special procedures actually to go and get it set up. So we got a special nice truck for it. We said can't be like a commercial truck that says U-Haul on it. That won't be good. We should get a nice white truck. So we brought it over there, and then we backed it up over to the building where the guy lives, and kind of took it gingerly up the stairs there. And it turns out they had like a really nice place inside for us to do this. So we set up, and there's the Smithsonian guys there. Very fortunately, they gave us a whole day to practice, which was good. And then the day that it actually happened, I would say we were quite nervous that we were really hoping like the cameras would take all the pictures. We have to take like 10 photos synchronized with the lights in a row. And fortunately, it went, we had to do this very fast too. Like even if we have a pretty major actor, we block out like at least an hour of their time to do the scans. We were told basically this needs to happen in about 2 minutes. So we managed there. So here we go. This is the summer of 2014. And we had a great subject. He was interested in the technology. We didn't do a full set of facial expressions. That would have been lovely, but the goal was not to create a photoreal digital character that we can do anything with. It was mostly to get a 3D model for a sculpture. I was really hoping the White House photographer would get a good picture of this. I think they did okay for that. They put it right under the portrait of Abraham Lincoln. That actually kind of works because he is the only other president that there is a 3D measurement of, a 3D record of. There's plaster casts of his face shortly before his inauguration and shortly before his assassination, which exists. You can actually buy one on eBay for not too much. But he was watching over us the whole time, so that added to the pressure a little bit. We had 14 cameras on the stage. There's 8 which took all the photos and a couple of Canon Rebels just to get some more coverage there. And we used our polarized gradient illumination here. We're basically, this is all cross-polarized, so there's no specular reflection. That's good for the texture map. And then we parallel polarize to accentuate the specular reflection. That's that first surface reflection that doesn't have any blur or shine. It gives us the highest resolution detail. And then we change the directionality of that so it's mostly from the left, the right, above and below. And by watching how the light plays off of the specular reflection, we get the high resolution detail. That's basically how the process works. And so the model that we got was pretty good. We had to process everything like that night before and had access to the data for about a month total. And this actually is in the National Archives. And it was used by the Smithsonian folks, in addition to some scans that they did with a portable structured light scanner to get the back of the head and the rest of the torso to make a 3D print here. This doesn't have like the coloration and texture maps yet, but it did seem to go over reasonably well with the people it matters to. And so that will be on display sometime not too far from now. I have one last thing to mention, which is another set of individuals that also felt like we're actually kind of sort of doing something a little important with our technology. And that's a collaboration that we've been doing with the University of Southern California's Shoah Foundation. And they have been working since the 1990s. After Steven Spielberg made the movie Schindler's List, he realized that there's a lot of important oral history of testimony that people have who went through the World War II Holocaust, and it's not necessarily being recorded. So he felt that he should start recording these things in interviews. So there's 20,000 hours of interviews on various kinds of beta SP tape in the archive. But they realized, well, we still have a few years left that we can really talk to some of these people and hear what they went through. Let's try to record them in a way that's maybe a little bit more future-proof. And they had the idea, let's actually record them in one of our light stages, and let's try to get something that we could maybe eventually even like project kind of as a three-dimensional hologram. And also, let's interview them with a lot of questions so that maybe after an entire week and we get like 1,000 responses, we'd have enough clips to play back so that somebody visiting a museum or a special exhibit at a community center could ask whatever question they want to. And even if it's 50 years in the future, this projection of the person would be able to answer that question or something close to it, at least for most of the things people might want to ask. So working with the Institute's Natural Language Group and Dr. David Traum, we actually interviewed this fellow Pinchas Guter for about a week. We recorded him from about 60 video cameras. 30 of them were going from straight right to straight front to straight left, 6 degrees apart. One of the things that we imagined that we'd be able to do with this data is hopefully eventually like invent some kind of hologram projection technology. This is just mocked up in Photoshop, where this survivor could visit a classroom and then somebody could ask a question and then he'd be able to reply. And ideally would look three-dimensional, life-size. You can move around to either side, see him from the side, see him from the side, see him in 3D, and make that work. And so with some support from our institute, we were actually able to do a demonstration of this for the SIGGRAPH 2015 conference. We built a video projector array with 216 video projectors. After interpolating that 6-degree apart imagery into 0.6 degree apart imagery, we just showed lots of views onto the back of a screen that diffuses light vertically a lot and horizontally just about 1 degree, and produced something that is some kind of version of this vision. So we're going to see our graduate student Koki Nagano ask a question of this hologram of Pinchas Guter, and then we'll hear a little bit of his response. And since we've recorded Pinchas, we've also recorded 12 other survivors of the Holocaust as well, and this is getting released in museums these days.
How did you survive the Holocaust?
How did I survive? I survived, I believe, because Providence watched over me. And also the fact that for a long time, my parents watched over us and guarded us and kept us hidden for almost 3.5 years, both before the ghetto was closed and after the ghetto was closed. And then my father told me when we were taken to the death camp that I must say that I'm 18 years old because children were being murdered, all the time, immediately.
So very impactful stories, very important stories, things that are every bit as important today as they were then. And that's just straight video shot out of a Handycam. And it's actually really an interesting experience because you walk around with the video camera and the two characters look like they're maintaining eye contact the whole time, even as you move to the side, which wouldn't happen with a 2D projection. So we're hoping to get that into more museums. That's the last thing that I brought. I think we're at the end of my time. I'd like to thank our conference organizers, all of my many amazing collaborators that we've had, and then there's some websites with some more information. So thank you very much.